Well, hello everyone. My name is Chris with National Parents Organization, and today I'm here with Joseph Goldberg, who's a recognized expert in parental alienation. Mr. Goldberg says that parental alienation is oftentimes better understood as parental rejection. He's a psycho-legal education and litigation support consultant, which means he provides continuing education to lawyers, mental health professionals, and to parents who are engaged in high conflict, complex custody disputes that involve parent-child relationship problems. His divorce education programs are accredited in the courts in over 500 counties across the United States, and they can be accessed at onlineparentingprograms.com. Mr. Goldberg also provides litigation strategy and intervention recommendations to family law lawyers in court cases involving co-parental conflicts and children caught in the middle. He's the author of Parental Alienation and Children Exhibiting Visitation Refusal Behavior, which can be found online at mediate.com and ourfamilywizard.com. He is a member of the prestigious Parental Alienation Study Group, and he has a nationwide consulting practice for parents who are seeking help with parental rejection. His firm is called Goldberg and Associates, and he currently spends his time residing between Toronto, Canada, and Winter Park, Florida. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
So you've been in this business quite a long time and have a lot of experience, and so we're really excited to talk with you today. And so I just wanted to start out. What kind of got you into all of this? All this sort of working with parents and shared parenting and all that sort of stuff.
Well, the genesis of my interest in high conflict cases started with the interest in parental alienation. Back in 2009, I organized and hosted the first international conference on parental alienation with all of the leading experts in the field. And actually, my interest in that issue started actually before the movement for shared parenting. But even at that time, I was hearing many parents complaining about their access and custody problems in court cases, and many people at that time held the belief that if only there was a more equitable shared parenting ruling in the courts, it would abate the dynamics of parental alienation.
So yeah, I'll go back to, you said it was 2009. That's really the early days of when I think people started to recognize that there was an issue with sort of an imbalance in custody in traditional court cases, right? What were some of the things that you were seeing that really started that ball going?
Well, high conflict cases have been going on for centuries. It's nothing really new. But when Dr. Richard Gardner, back in the 1980s, sort of got the ball rolling with parental alienation syndrome as a theory of parental alienation, this launched a whole new paradigm for parents to look at the cause of the co-parenting conflicts and their parent-child relationship problems. And there was not a lot of attention until Dr. Richard Gardner started that with the theory that there were 8 symptoms that he identified as the somewhat definition of parental alienation syndrome. And over the years, so that is changed to the term parental alienation because there was a lot of criticism about the theory. There was a lot of criticism of Dr. Richard Gardner. And so to find a more safe harbor for the dynamic, they switched to the term parental alienation. But what that unfortunately led to was 3 or 4 different definitions of parental alienation over the last 15, 20 years. And even today, there is really no universal definition for that term. So it remains somewhat ambiguous and controversial.
Yeah, I know there in the beginning there was a lot of resistance to it. I think now even still there is some resistance to parental alienation, right? I think I've seen a lot of arguments where people say that it's just used as an excuse to try and get more custody. It's that sort of a thing. But Over the years, have you seen that there's been more of an acceptance that there is a problem with this sort of thing?
Well, I suppose it may depend on who you ask. There are some victories with the courts recognizing parental alienation. Certainly, the behaviors of a parent trying to turn a child against uh, a parent they have a loving, bonded relationship with for an unjustified reason is something that judges can appreciate, even without the definition.
Sure. So I want to talk too, and ask you just get the ball rolling here. So why are parents having such poor outcomes in court, and what can they do about that?
Well, that is one of the most important problems that really deserves a good answer, and I think that I could explain it this way. There's a very famous book called The Art of War, which many people have heard about.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
There's a quotation from that book that says every battle is won before it's fought. And what that means basically is that you have to plan to have a strategy that gives you every possible advantage to win. But that never happens in family court. And the reason that it doesn't happen is partly because parents, when they retain an attorney, they do so with misplaced trust and blind confidence that the lawyer has all the answers, has the plan. But unfortunately, the truth is the ugly truth is that the lawyers that even the most experienced lawyers in the large majority of cases have a very outdated schematic of the best interventions and strategies to win the arguments and to place and track their clients into the correct interventions. But unfortunately, because lawyers are not really acquainted with some of the research, the more current research, I would say, they rely on what they know. They stay in their lane, and unfortunately, they steer people into strategies and towards professionals that are not competent, do not understand the factors that cause parental rejection, and so you get all these terrible outcomes because the clients really need to smarten up, and they do not have the most important ingredient to win, which is they need to have an expert that understands these very complex and high conflict cases working in a capacity where they give the lawyer the playbook, the strategy, and they coach and they educate the lawyer step by step what they have to do. And even before you allow your lawyer to start filing petitions or anything with the court, there really has to be a period of weeks where you go through some roundtable discussions about all the issues involved in the case, what to do, what not to do, how to counter the next argument that the opposing counsel might have. And if you don't do those things, then you don't give yourself the opportunity to test the competency of the lawyer, the cooperation of the lawyer working with the expert. Because if you don't have a team that's working and pulling together and in a full agreement on the strategy before the case begins, there's no hope of getting a good outcome.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that lawyers know the law, right? But they aren't necessarily psychologists. They don't really know all of the emotional things that go on, and let's be honest, they benefit when there's conflict, right? So they don't have a really big incentive to have low conflict in the cases, right?
That's true too. Yeah, I mean, there's I'm sure that there are notebooks we could fill with all of the factors that contribute to why these cases go south. But if you want to focus on how to win the case, then my suggestion to people is you got to find the right expert, the right consultant, get them involved in the initial auditing of the case before you retain a lawyer, maybe even let the consultant select the lawyer, pre-interview the lawyers, negotiate the lowest possible retainer. These are some of the right decisions to make to win the case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just kind of skip that step and they just go open the yellow pages up or look online and find a lawyer, and they might call the one with the nicest looking website and not really know who's got the best skills for their case, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, people take advice that's poor advice from friends, from family members, from social media platforms. They get all kinds of poor recommendations, and at the same time, you really have to be empathetic of somebody going through this, because they are really being pounded with stress and other factors that are compromising their ability to cognitively find their way through these problems in a rational way. And so they're being impaired by all these stress factors, and I can understand why many of them just want to throw their hands up and just throw it on the desk of an attorney and say, just this is what I want, help me, just
Yeah,
give me what I need.
just take care of it. Sure.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to parental alienation and tell us again, why is parental alienation so controversial, and what can a family do when there is parental alienation present? Is there kind of a right thing and a wrong thing to do, and how do you identify it really?
Well, I've been an expert in parental alienation for, nearly 20 years, and I am steering away from the term parental alienation because I prefer to use a different term, which is parental rejection, because that is a behavior that we can look at and understand and empathize with. Whereas when we talk about parental alienation or parental alienation syndrome, these terms are attached to theories that not only are confusing people, because the terms are sometimes conflated, and sometimes they're conflated intentionally by professionals to confuse judges in court. And that's one of the weaknesses of parental alienation theory. Now, it's controversial in part because it's an untestable theory, and untestable theories are difficult to prove. Nevertheless, there are lawyers out there who are propagating false narratives that they can prove parental alienation. And I don't want to mention names, but unfortunately, people want to cling to what they believe. They read things online, they research things on their own, they're fully relatable to the experience of that parent, and they grasp onto parental alienation and hold onto it tightly as the explanation for the child's rejection. Um, Parental alienation underwent a reformulation in 2001, thanks to Dr. Janet Johnston, who did a benchmark article called The Alienated Child. It was the reformulation of parental alienation theory. More recently, there's been some splitting in the opinion of the experts. More recently, Dr. Craig Childress has postulated this attachment-based parental alienation model, also highly criticized. And so it's really no wonder why today there remains this ambiguity about whether it's a real thing or not a real thing. I can also say that I have spent probably a lot of the time over the last 3 years working outside my lane by reviewing different journal articles in psychiatry, in medicine, and there's new research that provides an explanation for parental rejection that is far better than the theory of parental alienation. And actually, I'm writing an article that I'm going to be publishing on that topic, hopefully sometime this month.
Well, we certainly look forward to reading that when it comes out. I've talked to a lot of different people in the field now, and it seems to me like there's really two areas that people generally have problems with. One is when a parent is intentionally trying to, you know, basically turn the children against the other parent, right? And then there's another area where it seems like people are unintentionally trying to, they're unintentionally turning the child against the parent. Is that kind of your experience too, or is that too simple of a way to boil it down?
Well, no, not really. I think what you're touching on is something that's been discussed in some of the literature, originally by Dr. Douglas Darnell. He was the first one to explain parental alienation in the context of three variations of the types of alienators that exist. He described them as naive alienators, in other words, alienating parents that do things that are just dumb. They say things out loud they shouldn't, say in front of the children. Then when you tell them what they did, they understand that they did something wrong and they can correct their behavior. Then you have the active alienating parents. They know what they're doing. They don't care that you don't agree with them. They just want to keep on doing it. They can only be stopped sometimes if you bring them to court and you can get a judge to issue an order to make them suffer some consequences, and then they back off. And then there's the third type, which is the obsessed alienating parent. The only way I could kind of describe them is like the Terminator. They will do what they want. The judge will write a court order, say, don't ever do this kind of thing again. The minute they walk out the courtroom, they are doing it again.
Yeah.
So those are the obsessed types.
Yeah, certainly no fun if you've ever had to deal with that last type there. I want to talk now and tell me, what problems have people had with professionals in the court system? I'm talking about your guardian ad litems, your parental coordinators, your custody evaluators. Those sorts of people that are, they're not really lawyers or judges, but they're sort of legal professionals in the court system.
Yeah, it's a dominant problem for people, and this is somewhat aligned with what I was saying earlier about how lawyers steer their clients into these false positive, hopeful interventions that only fail. And part of the reason for the failures from these professionals is that there are some expectations that because of their education and training, they're supposed to stay in their lane. They're supposed to just do what they know. And there are ethical and professional guidelines that reinforce that standard. So they're not going to look outside their lane for research in other fields of science, psychiatry, medicine, where they might actually stumble upon something like I have, where they find a better explanation, an alternative treatment approach to a problem. And so you get people who are appointed sometimes by judges, other times by two lawyers getting together in the back room of a law office and saying, who do you like? I don't know, who do you like? And they pick somebody out of a hat. Doesn't really matter if they're competent, incompetent. There are people that violate their ethical and professional guidelines by practicing outside the boundaries of their core competencies, and they do so with the best of intentions, but that leads to bad outcomes. So they slither into these roles and they didger away at what they think they know will solve the problem, and it ends up in total failures. So.
Now, before we got recording, we had talked about some scenarios here, so I want to run through some of these with you. And the first one is, let's say you have parents that tried to communicate, kind of in a civil way, but, it kind of turns nasty whenever they talk. And to make matters worse, one parent is making all the decisions without asking the other parent. What should parents do in a scenario like this?
I believe there's really only one correct answer to that question. And that is, I would tell someone you should run, not walk. Don't procrastinate. Don't hesitate. Don't give yourself any excuse not to look for a consultant or an expert to get involved, to have a consultation with, to lay out your problems and discuss what that person would recommend. That's the first thing that they could do right. Anything other than that is going to lead to poor outcomes.
That's great advice. Okay, the second one, let's say you have parents with very limited financial resources and they have the sort of just the worst conflict imaginable. What should parents do in that case?
Well, it partly depends on, the individual. Like, do they have the determination? Do they have the emotional energy to pursue an effort to change the dynamic? Um, there's another expression. It's not the size of the dog in the fight; it's the size of the fight in the dog. And if you have the motivation, if you have the determination, even with very limited financial resources, there are many, many ways you could cobble together a strategy that should start with good advice from an expert, of course, but people can represent themselves. They can hire lawyers on a limited scope retainer rather than have them represent them in court. They could get a lawyer to give them advice about how to prepare the documents, how to serve them on the other party, give them a little coaching advice on how to represent themselves in court. There are paralegals that also prepare a lot of this legal work. There are a lot of things that you can do, and you can get good outcomes even from a distance. So even if you're a parent that's being blocked from having any custody or access or any influence directly with the child, there's a lot of wonderful things that a parent can still do from the distance to help their children get the right services that they're going to need to be able to help themselves, to give them the tools that they need to individuate themselves away from the negative influences and power of a parent with a control agenda.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents just really miscalculate or or I should say, underestimate the amount of financial resources it really takes to litigate a case properly, right? And I think that's why you see a lot of parents going through bankruptcy after divorce because they simply misunderstood really how expensive it is if you're going to full out litigate any sort of contentious divorce.
True.
Okay, the last one I want to ask you about is if you have an adolescent around age 15 that rejects a parent, it's also self injuring, or if they're threatening to harm themselves and they're forced to see a parent that they do not see, that they don't want to see, then what do you do in a case like this? So it sounds like you've got an adolescent here about 15 and they've got some unhealthy, things that they're doing here. What do you do in that case?
Well, that's a really important question to ask because so many people are really struggling with that one. They want to see their children, they want to help them, they want to blame the other parent for most of the problem. Um, they understand the child is saying things that should be understood very clearly as messages that they are in a very severe state of dysregulation. And so you shouldn't push a child to a point where you force them to have contact with you if they're expressing feelings of suicidal ideation, threatening to run away, threatening to hurt themselves or hurt that parent. I mean, this happens. It happens more often than we like to know. And so there are some parents that are very persistent. They want what they want and they don't think about the potential consequences. And sometimes it ends in real tragedies. So I would say to that parent, back off, take a deep breath. There's lots of other ways that you can help your children, even if you're not seeing them, like I said a moment ago. But you really kind of need the right expert to help you navigate so that you kind of are getting the input from somebody who can tell you what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. Um, and if you put all your eggs in one basket with a family law lawyer, well, you might not even be able to get in touch with them during a crisis. So you need the right advice when you need it. And that's why I try to suggest to people find yourself a good expert, find yourself a good consultant, let that individual fill a role that, even if it's not widely understood by family law lawyers, doesn't matter. You as the client need to take charge of your own case. You need to smarten up, and you need to get in the game with the right professionals to help you.
Excellent. And the last question that I have for you is, what's the best advice you have for parents when they just can't agree and they think all is lost? I mean, should a parent give up in that case, or what can they do?
Well, there's good reasons and there's bad reasons for giving up. I can fully understand. Dr. Richard Warshak wrote an addendum to his book Divorce Poison recently, and he actually touches on this topic himself, and he says, there are times when it is appropriate to just simply, fold your hand, give up. It's not going to go anywhere. But on the other hand, there's too many people that give up prematurely, and they don't really ask for the help that would lead them to maybe understand that there are still possible options that they could consider that would help their children. I mean, it may not achieve the initial objective of repairing the parent-child relationship. I understand that could seem like a very distal goal to accomplish. But the overarching objective here is to first help your children with the services that they need to get, even if it is over the objections of the other parent. Because if you can track them into either the right therapeutic intervention or non-therapeutic intervention, that would give them the tools, again, I say, to withstand the negative influence of a parent, to restore their critical thinking, to enhance their development, then you're doing wonderful things for your kid, even from that distance. So maybe you shouldn't give up before you talk to somebody and ask them to audit your current situation and give you their opinion on it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth mentioning that, in all these cases are very individual and unique, but certainly, for each case there's going to be no singular wrong or right answer, right? But you can certainly look at what other people have done and successes that they've had, and try and use that for guidance and what you should do in your case.
Yes.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we sign off?
Want to wish everybody a happy 2022. Let's get over this COVID thing.
Definitely, yeah.
We want living.
We want to go back to living and get that all behind us. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and let us know, Joseph, where can people reach out to you? I know you've got a number of websites. We're going to list those all in the notes here. We've got your online classes at onlineparentingprograms.com. There's the CSPAS website, which is www.cspas.ca. And then there's your Goldberg and Associates website, which is parentalalienation.ca. Can anybody find you on the social media?
Well, I have a social media page under Goldberg and Associates. I also have a business page on Facebook for parental alienation consulting services. But the primary website I would refer people to is the one that is parentalalienation.ca.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Chris. Have a happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Take care.